Hey everyone, it's Lassie and welcome back to Virtual Paddock. Today with the fifth and final part of the history of the Porsche 911. Now throughout its years, the 911 had gradually become larger, and thus also heavier. But especially sports cars should be light, and Porsche kept this in mind with the next generation of the 911. Introduced in 2011 as a totally new platform, the 991. And despite being slightly larger than the 997, the 991 is about 40 kilograms lighter. A lot of it due to the materials used. For example, nearly half the body was made from aluminium instead of only steel. They'd also downsized the engine for the base Carrera models down to 3.4 liters. Still with a slight power boost though, it had 350 horsepower now. The Carrera S and GTS variants kept the 3.8, with 400 and 430 horsepower respectively. And all of these were available with 4-wheel drive as well, of course. And you could choose between a 7-speed manual and a 7-speed PDK. Which you couldn't for the turbo. Ever since the 991, the 911 turbo has been PDK only. The power came from a twin-turbo 3.8, which made 520 horsepower in the turbo and 560 horsepower in the Turbo S, which allowed the Turbo S to go from 0 to 100 km an hour in 2.9 seconds, the first 911 to go sub 3 seconds. But the turbo models weren't the only ones that were PDK only. The GT3 versions as well. And speaking of them, the 991 version of the GT3 was first presented at the 2013 Geneva Motor Show. The engine was based on the 3.8 in the Carrera S, but quite heavily modified, so it produced 475 horsepower and could rev up to 9,000 RPM. It was also the first 911 with rear axle steering. So at speeds up to 50 km an hour, the rear wheels would steer opposite to the front's 2.8 degrees maximum. It was basically like shortening the wheelbase and thus making the car more agile. And above 80 km an hour, the rear wheels steered up to 1.5 degrees in the same direction as the front wheels in order to improve stability. Now unfortunately, the GT3 had one severe problem. It wasn't the most reliable. Quite a few engine failures, 2 of them even caught fire. So in early 2014, Porsche halted production of the GT3 and issued a recall for the ones already delivered. They managed to identify the problem, replaced the engines and extended the warranty. It only affected the normal GT3 though, not the GT3 RS. That one didn't come out until 2015 anyway. It looked more aggressive than ever. Much bigger rear wing than the GT3, louvers on the front fenders, and the air intake for the engine was moved to the front of the rear fenders. It was the first naturally aspirated 911 to get the hole, like on the turbo. But speaking of the engine, the GT3 RS had a 4-liter naturally aspirated flat 6 with 500 horsepower. Now I mentioned that the GT3 models were PDK only, but there was a GT3 base model that was manual only. Limited to 991 examples, the 2016 Porsche 911R. Basically a GT3 RS that didn't look like one. Same chassis and engine, but no wings and louvers, no side air inlets, and you could only get it with a 6-speed manual. And this was also the last model from the first phase of the 991, commonly known as the 991.1. Because at the 2015 Frankfurt Motor Show, Porsche had already presented the facelifted version, the 991.2. New front and rear bumpers, new dual exhaust pipes, new options for the head and tail lights, but most importantly, a new engine for the Carrera and Targa models. A 3-liter twin-turbocharged flat 6 with 370 horsepower in the base models, 420 horsepower in the S, and 450 horsepower in the GTS. Yes, you heard that right. For the first time ever, the base 911s had turbocharged engines. The transmission options stayed the same though. You could either have a 7-speed manual or a 7-speed PDK. In late 2017, Porsche extended the model range with a Carrera T, which stands for Touring. It was basically a modified Carrera, same drivetrain, rear-wheel drive, but with a shorter rear axle ratio, mechanical diff lock, and lowered suspension, among other things. Now, even though the Carreras were now turbocharged, there was of course still a 911 turbo for the 991.2, keeping with the 3.8, but got another power boost with 540 horsepower now, and 580 horsepower for the Turbo S. And in June 2017, Porsche launched a limited edition called the 911 Turbo S Exclusive Series, with several body panels made out of carbon fiber, as well as a power kit which brought it up to 607 horsepower. If you want a naturally aspirated 911, you still have the GT3 models. The GT3 itself now had a 4-liter flat 6 with 500 horsepower. It also brought back the manual transmission as an option, as well as upgrades to the aero to increase downforce. However, if downforce wasn't that important to you, you could get the GT3 Touring. This was essentially the successor to the 911R, but based on the GT3 instead of the GT3 RS, and not limited in terms of production numbers. But like the 911R, it didn't feature any of the extensive aero, and was also manual transmission only. The GT3 RS on the other hand was still PDK only, and its 4-liter flat 6 made 520 horsepower now. It looked even more aggressive than the 901.1 version, with aqueducts on the front boot lid, side skirts, and an updated rear wing. If you went for the Weissach package, you get even more carbon fiber parts, as well as BBS magnesium wheels. And on the 18th of April 2018, Porsche's works driver Kevin Estre set a lap time of 6 minutes and 56.4 around the Nordschleife with the GT3 RS, which made it the third Porsche road car to go sub 7. First one had been the 918 Spider back in 2013, and second was another 991. Introduced in 2017, the GT2 RS. This one had a 3.8-liter twin-turbo flat 6 making 700 horsepower, the most powerful 911 ever made as of yet. And was all about performance. Magnesium roof, front spoiler and rear wing made of carbon fiber, same with the front lid, titanium exhaust and polycarbonate rear and side windows. But unlike its predecessor from the 997, the 991 GT2 RS was PDK only, simply because it was faster and could handle more torque. And it paid off, because in September 2017, Porsche's test driver Lars Kern set a lap time of 6 minutes and 47.3 around the Nordschleife. And the following year, in October 2018, he even did a 640.33 in a modified version, the 911 GT2 RS MR, which had been upgraded by Montai Racing. Now, by then, the 991 wasn't even the end of its production, but to give it a proper send-off, as well as to celebrate the 70th anniversary of Porsche as a road car brand, in October 2018, they presented the 991 version of the Speedster. With a GT3 chassis and engine, so a 4-liter naturally aspirated flat 6 making 510 horsepower in this one, manual transmission only with a 6-speed, and the body was based on that of the Carrera 4 Cabriolet, though with the typical Speedster features such as the lower windshield and double bubble roof cover. And because the first Porsche road car came out in 1948, the 991 Speedster was limited to 1,948 units. So let's take it on the road. Right, so time for a drive in the 991 generation 911 Speedster. And I noticed I haven't really mentioned the Speedster at all before. So to give you a bit of history of the Speedster, the first Porsche Speedster actually came out in 1954. It was the 356 Speedster. That was, as the name says, a combination of speed and roadster. It's a lightweight roadster. Things like a lower windshield, which has always been pretty much the Speedster's main identifying feature. And the Speedster was basically meant to enjoy like roads along the coast, like this. Then when 356 became 356A, they also did a Speedster version for that one, but not for 356B or C. And for 911, the Speedster didn't come out until 1989. First 911 Speedster came at the end of the G series. Really, all 911 Speedsters have come at the end of their respective generations, but only a few generations have had a Speedster. Second 911 Speedster came in 1993, so at the end of the 964. But then the next one didn't come until 2011, 997. And the fourth one is this one, 991 Speedster. This is also probably the closest thing that'll ever be to a GT3 convertible, which Porsche has never officially done, but as you know, this one has the GT3 chassis, it's got the GT3 engine, naturally aspirated, 4 liters, 510 horsepower, and well, lovely sound. Now, 991 in general was pretty well received. The thing is, Porsche has never been afraid to try new things, and as a result, possibly upset some of the purists. One example is the steering, because for 991, Porsche decided to no longer go with the hydraulic power steering, instead go for electric power steering. And I mean, I've never driven a real 911, so I have no idea what the steering in 911 feels like, but at least a bunch of purists were quite upset about that change. Another controversial point was, of course, the change to turbocharged engines for the base models. But 911 wasn't the first Porsche to which it happened, because Porsche a few years earlier, I think around 2012, 2013, was when the Boxster and Cayman series became the 718. 718 Boxster and 718 Cayman. They switched from a naturally aspirated flat 6 to turbocharged flat 4. I mean, like the 911, the Boxster and the Boxster and Cayman still have a few natural aspirated flat 6 versions. Okay, so back to 911. There is one thing that even I would say is a bit annoying about the 991, because this one you can no longer see the engine. Like in previous 911s, when you open the engine cover at the back, you could still see the engine. And this one, when you open the engine cover, all you see like is a bunch of cooling fans, and the engine is completely hidden away. So I will say that that's somewhat annoying about 991, but overall, I'm at 991. I think it actually looks great, and I would actually say that it is probably my favorite newer generation of the 911. And so we've come to the present. First presented in November of 2018 for the 2019 model year, the 992, the current generation of the 911. They actually presented the Carrera S and 4S first, while the base Carrera and Carrera 4 were presented in July of 2019. And unlike the previous generations, every model in the 992 range now has wide rear wheel arches, even the base models. The engine in the Carrera and Targa models is still a 3-liter twin-turbo flat 6, as on the 991.2, but again with a slight power boost for every model. 385 horsepower for the base Carrera and Targa, 450 horsepower for the S, and 480 horsepower for the GTS. And for this year, for 2023, Porsche added the 911 Carrera T to the lineup. Again, T for touring. And like on the 901.2, the 992 Carrera T is also based on the base Carrera, but a little sportier, with sport seats as standard, as well as different suspension, the car sitting around 10mm lower than standard Carrera. For the transmissions, Porsche originally only offered an 8-speed PDK for the 992, but nowadays you can also get a 7-speed manual for most models, at least the whole Carrera and Targa range. Whereas the turbo is once again PDK only. But in the 992, Porsche actually presented the Turbo S first, the more powerful version, introduced in March 2020, and it's powered by a 3.7-liter twin-turbo flat 6, producing 650 horsepower. The standard turbo came out a few months later, in July of 2020. Same engine, but making 580 horsepower in the turbo. Now, the 911 isn't exactly a car you'd associate with off-roading, but in late 2022, Porsche did present an off-road 911, limited to 2,500 units, the 911 Dakar, with a powertrain based on the Carrera 4 GTS, so all-wheel drive, but PDK only, and with much shorter gear ratios. And compared to other 911s, the suspension is lifted significantly, and it's even got a roof rack. And for those who are interested in taking their 911s to the racetrack, the GT3 range has got you covered. The standard GT3 came out in February of 2021, still with a 4-liter naturally aspirated flat 6, making 510 horsepower now. There's also a GT3 Touring available, without most of the aero. And this time, both versions are available with either a 6-speed manual or a 7-speed PDK. The GT3 RS, on the other hand, is once again PDK only, also 7-speed. This one was presented in August of 2022, and it's possibly the most uncompromising track-focused machine that Porsche has ever made, at least while still keeping road legal. Extensive aero, the rear wing even has active aero, similar to the RS. The power once again comes from a 4-liter naturally aspirated flat 6, making 525 horsepower on the GT3 RS. So let's take this track monster on track. What better track for the GT3 RS than, of course, the Nordschleife. And this car did an official Nordschleife lap time of 6 minutes and 49.328, which I'm not going to try to beat with this lap. But keep in mind that that's just about 2 seconds slower than the 991 GT2 RS, which had 175 more horsepower. just tells you how absolutely track oriented this car is. Another good example is the gearing. This car's not geared for top speed. It's absolutely geared for acceleration. In fact, even compared to all other GT3 RS models, this one actually has the lowest top speed. The official top speed given by Porsche for this is 296 km an hour. All other GT3 RS models have top speed above 300 km an hour. Yet around the track, this one is of course faster. Just feels lovely to drive how you can really throw it into a corner and it sticks. Lovely car to drive. This hold up it actually kind of hits differently now, given that I've been to Nordschleife for real about 2 months ago. In fact, originally my lap should have been in a 992. Not GT3 RS, but GT3. Did a 6:59.9, I think, around Nordschleife. It's around 10 seconds slower. Still very, very fast. This car was also available with a visor package, which this particular mod doesn't have. It's also a mod for this car with the visor package. I actually decided to go for the one without because simply this one I feel drives better. I mean, in real life, it's gonna be different. I did actually see, while I was at the Nordschleife, I did see a few of these also. A few 992 GT3 RS. Keep in mind that this is just the 992.1 GT3 RS. I can't even begin to imagine what the 992.2 GT3 RS is gonna be like. It's really been ever since the 991. The design of the GT3 RS has gotten more expensive and expensive. I just activated the DRS. Gonna hit about 290. Yeah. It is. Close it again. Was a bit too hard on the brakes. Could have gone for that a bit faster. Still. There's no denying that the GT3 RS is basically a car that's made for the Nordschleife. And that's the history of the Porsche 911 until today. Though back in August of this year, Porsche actually presented another limited edition model, the 911 ST, based on the GT3 RS but without the extensive aero and with a 6-speed manual. It's limited to 1,963 units, which of course comes from 1963 being the birth year of the 911. Now, as you could see throughout this series, there have been quite a few big changes to the car in its 60 years. But a few things have always stayed the same. It's still the same basic shape, still rear-engined, and still has a flat 6. It's what makes it the 911. I wonder what's still to come. The 992 facelift is probably on the horizon, and there hasn't been a 992 GT2 RS yet. But for the 991, that one also came post facelift. Rumor has it that the 992 GT2 RS could be a hybrid, but let's see. I'm definitely excited to see what's next for my favorite car. I love the Porsche 911. But anyway, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video and in fact this series. So, till next time, use the downforce and see you soon.